Courage is a child protection and empowerment program for communities around the world. In the recent Children's Act amendment hearings, a question was asked about the state of child protection in South Africa. Questions were also raised about the relevance of adoption as a strategy in the safeguarding of our children. Courage decided to explore how we are doing in child protection and if adoption is still needed in South Africa. Child protection is the prevention and responding to violence, exploitation, and abuse against children. It is very important as issues such as child abuse, neglect, and exploitation can lead to anxiety, depression, suicide, learning disorders, post-traumatic stress, and developmental challenges. In the long term, a life of violence can result in substance abuse, poor self-regulation, risky sexual behavior, and toxic stress that impacts negatively on health and well-being. Let's understand the social context of our children in South Africa. There are around 19.7 million children in South Africa, which is around 35% of our total population. Around 1 million children are born every year. In South Africa, only 34% of children live with both their parents, 43% with their mothers, 3% with their fathers, and 20% with neither parent. The fact that so many children do not live with their biological parents is unique to this country, where parents are frequently absent from their children's daily lives. So how should we be looking after our vulnerable children? The Children's Act of 2005 specifies the child protection and safeguarding process in South Africa. Let's understand this process in more detail. If a child has been abandoned or neglected, abused, or exploited, the first step is to report this problem to a child protection officer who could be a social worker, the police, a doctor or nurse, a teacher, community or religious leader. The police or a social worker should then do an investigation. The safety of the child must be ensured. If there is any risk to the child, they must be removed from their home and placed in temporary care, such as a baby or children's home, in foster care or registered place of safety. The social worker will then need to assess if the issue can be dealt with through counselling and family support, or if statutory intervention is required through the Children's Court, in which case the parents and child must be prepared. If the decision is that counselling and support is sufficient to solve the problem, this can be undertaken by a social worker or family support organisation, who can also assist the parents in getting the correct documentation for their child and financial or social support. If a statutory intervention is required, the parents will be taken to court and a legal finding will be made. In this legal finding, the court may rule that the child be reunified with their parents with appropriate support, or they could decide to remove the child from their parents' care. If there was no criminal intent, the child will just be removed from the parents' care. However, if the parents intentionally abused, neglected, or exploited their child, they will be referred to the criminal justice system for prosecution. If a child is removed from their parents' care, an alternative care plan will be needed. This could include kinship care, where a child is cared for by other relatives in their family. Alternatively, the child could be placed into foster care, which should be a temporary placement for a maximum of 2 years. However, this is often not the case in South Africa. As a last resort, children can be placed into residential care, which is an orphanage or children's home, but this can have a detrimental impact on the child. If the child has no parents or family to care for them, the ideal placement is that of adoption, which gives the child a permanent family where they can belong. A child can be adopted locally or internationally in South Africa. Now let's understand this process in the context of South Africa's current child protection environment. In the area of abandonment and neglect, there are a number of challenges that need to be considered. Let's start with abandonment, where a child has been left for more than 3 months without any care. This can be done safely or unsafely, which can place the child's life at risk. Although government does not share statistics on child abandonment, it is estimated that around 3,500 children are abandoned annually in South Africa. Statistics from the Johannesburg morgues indicate that for every child that is found alive, at least 2 abandoned children die. The next challenge is that of orphans, where both of a child's parents have died. South Africa has around 471,000 double orphans, 48% of whom live in the poorest 20% of households in our country. Many children in South Africa struggle to access any form of formal registration or identity, despite this being enshrined in our Bill of Rights. In 2019, the Department of Basic Education noted that 10% of school-going children were undocumented in South Africa. This means that we could have over 2 million undocumented children living within our borders. Many children do not belong to a family or community in South Africa. There are around 642,000 migrant or displaced children currently living in our country. South Africa has the largest child migrant population on the African continent. Probably the biggest challenge in the sphere of neglect in South Africa is that of poverty and inequality. 59% of children live below the poverty line. 12.4 million children receive a child support grant. However, the amount given remains persistently below the food poverty line. Due to our HIV and AIDS pandemic, there are also a number of child-headed households who are often unable to access support due to the fact that they are children. We currently have around 55,000 children living in 33,000 child-only households. Many children do not even have a home and are living on the street as unaccompanied minors and refugees. It is estimated that there are around 250,000 children and adolescents living on the streets of South Africa. Neglect is often considered worse than child abuse as it involves the complete lack of care and support for a child. The Optimus study of 2016 found that 12.2% of children report being neglected in their home and 10.1% of children in their schools in South Africa. The police reported over 2,000 counts of neglect and ill treatment of children annually in their 2017-2018 report. Of the children in our institutional homes, 45% are there due to abandonment and neglect. Another indicator of neglect is that of nutrition, from hunger to obesity, not having a balanced diet, or the stunting of a child's growth. In South Africa, 11% of our children live in households where they go hungry. In children under 5 years, 27% are stunted in terms of their growth, 61% have anemia, and 13% are obese. Every child has a right to education and schooling in South Africa. However, of the 6.5 million children aged 0 to 5 years who should have subsidized access to early childhood development, 50% have no access, 38% are in unregistered schools, and only 12% are in registered ECD centers, of which only 9.6% are subsidized. Another form of neglect is not giving children the space or time to play. In South Africa, less than 50% of children do 1 hour of exercise per day, which is the minimum recommendation for children. In terms of healthcare, 21% of children do not have adequate sanitation in their home, and 30% do not have access to drinking water. In the area of HIV, AIDS, and mother-to-baby transmission, we have seen a significant improvement in South Africa with the introduction of ARVs in 2004. However, more than 500,000 children are living with HIV in this country, which is the highest number in Africa. Between 11.3% and 21% of young pregnant women are HIV positive. Special needs support is also an extremely neglected area in child protection in South Africa. There are over 2 million disabled children in South Africa, but only 150,000 receive a disability grant. More than 600,000 children with disabilities have never been to school in South Africa. In the category of child abuse, there are also a number of challenges to consider. From birth, the issue of late termination of pregnancy is a major challenge in South Africa. There is a high level of underreporting of late abortion. However, of the 260,000 annual abortions noted in South Africa, the majority are conducted illegally. In the area of drug and alcohol abuse, 1 in 10 deaths are attributed to alcohol in South Africa, which has the 5th highest alcohol consumption levels in the world. Parental abuse of alcohol and other drugs doubles a child's likelihood of being sexually abused. South Africa has the highest fetal alcohol syndrome statistics in the world, with 29 to 290 per 1,000 births versus the global average of just 8. When it comes to physical abuse, South Africa is once again far higher than the global averages, at 26% of adolescents versus just 22.6% globally. A child should feel safe and secure in their homes. However, 45% of children noted that they have experienced abuse in their own homes and 28% in other people's homes. Childline has noted a 47% annual increase in child abuse calls over lockdown. In the area of emotional abuse, 16 to 34% of children report emotional abuse in their homes and/or school. In the area of sexual abuse and rape, 1 in 3 children, a staggering 35.4%, have experienced sexual abuse or rape in South Africa. The risk of being sexually abused is at its highest between the age of 14 and 16 years. For each additional biological parent living in the home, the risk of being abused reduces by 20%, sobering when one considers that 66% of South African children live with one or neither of their biological parents. In the area of corporal punishment, despite it being against the law, 49% of adolescents have experienced corporal punishment in their school, and 57% of parents have reported smacking their children. When it comes to abuse of children with disabilities, a child with a disability is 78% more likely to experience some form of sexual abuse in South Africa. Abuse can also be experienced in the justice care system. The first level of violence is a lack of accountability. Officially, there are 13,250 children living in 354 registered child and youth care centres across South Africa. However, there are an unknown number of children living in unregistered centres. A social work study published in 2015 noted that as many as 100,000 children are being cared for in residential facilities throughout South Africa, meaning that over 85,000 children could be unaccounted for. Studies conducted indicate that most children's homes are overcrowded and underfunded, with very high care worker-to-child ratios. An NGO working in the sector has noted a 5-fold increase in reported cases of abuse in foster care over the lockdown period. Children also experience and are subjected to abuse in environments of excessive social unrest. South Africa has experienced 900 service delivery protests or riots over the past 6 months, which is an average of 8 per day, and this number appears to be increasing. In the area of murder and attempted murder, South Africa's child homicide rate is far higher than the global averages at 5.5%. 46% of these homicides are due to abuse, neglect, and abandonment. 74% of fatal child abuse occurs in the 0 to 4 year age group, with most of these deaths occurring in the child's home. In the final category of exploitation of children, a number of challenges must once again be considered. We have noted teenage pregnancy in the area of exploitation due to the massive challenge of patriarchy in South Africa. Over 5% of girls aged 14 to 19 years, which is more than 250,000, stated that they were going through different stages of pregnancy in the last 12 months in 2019. We know that between 11 and 21% of these teens are HIV positive, and many speculate that this is due to the high rate of far older sexual partners, referred to as sugar daddies. These relationships are sometimes negotiated by the girls themselves, but far too often this arrangement has been agreed to by their parents or guardians. A multi-site cross-sectional survey found that many young girls are unable to negotiate their partner's condom use in age-disparate sexual relationships. In the area of child trafficking, South Africa is noted as a source, transit, and destination country for child trafficking globally, but few statistics exist. We are also placed on the Tier 2 watch list for human trafficking, which is a country whose government does not fully comply with the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. In Africa, children comprise the largest group of trafficking victims at almost 60%. Child labour refers to work by children under 18 years, which is exploitative, hazardous, or otherwise inappropriate for their age, detrimental to their schooling and overall development. In a report compiled by UNICEF in 2012, 784,000 children aged 7 to 17 years were found to be vulnerable on at least one of the indicators of worst forms of child labour in South Africa. 2.4 million children are engaged in economic activities in South Africa, and 34.2% are exposed to at least one hazardous working condition. When it comes to the commercial sexual exploitation of children, 40 to 50% of the estimated 1.39 million people forced into commercial sexual work in South Africa are children. Child marriage is also a major challenge across the continent. The practice of ukutwala has evolved in contemporary South Africa, from consensual elopement to unwilling abduction, where young girls are forced into marriage, often with older men. Shockingly, over 91,000 girls between the ages of 12 and 17 years were noted as being married, divorced, separated, widowed, or living with a partner as husband and wife in 2017 in South Africa. Children frequently mention their daily battle to avoid recruitment by or becoming victims of gangsterism in courage workshops. There are literally hundreds of child soldiers in the gangs of the Western Cape, some as young as 12 years of age. Gangsterism is said to account for the fact that the murder rate in Cape Town is double the national rate, and 50% higher than all other major cities in South Africa. Beyond Cape Town, gang activity, often associated with household and individual crime, is on the increase, impacting 1.4 million people in 2018. The final area in the exploitation of children is that of addiction. We are noted to be among the top 10 narcotics and alcohol abusers in the world, and the average age of experimentation is just 12 years of age. 80% of male youth deaths are alcohol-related in South Africa, and drug consumption is estimated to be twice the global norm. Unfortunately, challenges of abuse, neglect, and exploitation also happen within the child protection system, specifically in the area of access to justice and legal protection. In a study conducted in 2017, tracking child abuse cases through the child protection system, researchers found that only 45% of cases reported to the police could be found on the Department of Social Development system. When it came to investigations of abuse and neglect, 80% of cases were investigated, and abuse and neglect were confirmed in 61% of them. However, only 8% of files contained a report, speaking to extremely poor record keeping. When it came to ensuring the safety of the child and removing them from their homes if abuse or neglect was found, 50% of children remained in the care of their parents, 25% in the care of another family member, and only 11% were removed and placed in alternative care. In 91% of cases reviewed, the perpetrator was reported to the police. However, they were only arrested in 75% of the cases. In 23% of the cases, they were not. When it came to statutory intervention, only 22% of cases progressed to court. In those court cases, 40% had no closure date, and where data was available, 2/3 of cases were closed in a year, mostly due to withdrawal by the prosecutor. Most cases took more than 2 years to prosecute, increasing the trauma experienced by the children involved. In terms of the cases reviewed, 60% were withdrawn, 12% were found guilty, 9% are unknown, and 7% were found to be not guilty. Many alternative child protection care plans also have a number of challenges, as in the case of kinship care and foster care. South Africa's HIV and AIDS pandemic saw many orphans being cared for by family members registered on the foster care system. This has led to a crisis in the foster care system. Foster care orders require court proceedings every 2 years, resulting in around 300,000 court orders lapsing in 2017. Excessive caseloads and paperwork take social workers away from the abused and neglected children who often need immediate emergency care. When it comes to residential care, a child protection strategy openly supported by the Department of Social Development in the recent Children's Amendment hearings, the number of children in residential care is contested. However, the impact of residential care on children is not. Failure to thrive, a significant impact on the physical and psychosocial development of children, insecure attachment, and a range of learning challenges, all have been noted in global research into residential care over many years. In the area of adoptions, the challenges are most profound. For years, social workers have noted the constructive prevention of adoption by the Department of Social Development and Home Affairs officials in South Africa. To illustrate this, adoptions have fallen from 2,434 in 2011 to just 1,123 in 2020, a decline of over 53% in an environment where children are needing this form of child protection even more. So the question is South Africa protecting its children from neglect, abuse, exploitation, and violence in general? The answer is a resounding no. Instead, what we are seeing are 3 clear and what appear to be intended strategies of institutional neglect. The first is the distinct lack of documentation, research, or statistics when it comes to the care and protection of our children. If no numbers are kept or shared by the Department of Social Development, there is no accountability, and they have plausible deniability for all of the challenges outlined in this presentation. Secondly, the unrealistic requirements that the Department of Social Development place on NGOs, CPOs, and ECD centres, given the reality of where they are situated in townships around South Africa. No registration means that there is no need for funding, monitoring, or evaluation, and once again, the ability to deny many of the challenges identified. Finally, the lack of delivery of even basic services to communities in which many of the NGO and ECD centres are based means that the possibility of compliance to government's strict regulations becomes absolutely impossible. How does one provide off-street parking in a township that has no roads to speak of, or appropriate sanitation where there are no permanent toilets or water provision? If anything, this presentation serves as a reminder of how out of touch the South African government is with the plight of its children and its mandate to protect them. In a country with so many child protection challenges, strategies such as adoption are critical in providing permanent care for orphaned, abandoned, and vulnerable children. Special thanks to the UCT Children's Institute, the Child Law Institute, and independent researchers who continue to search for the truth around child protection in South Africa. Thanks for watching, stay strong, and take courage.